Some women don't chase, and yet, they're never forgotten. They don't shout. They don't demand. They don't unravel themselves in frantic explanations, trying to prove their worth to those who've already decided not to see it. And somehow, in that silence, they become magnetic. Untouchable. Not because they've hardened themselves against the world, but because they've stopped performing for it. There's a woman who walks through your memory like smoke through a room, lingering, elusive, impossible to grasp. She didn't leave with thunder. She didn't slam doors or deliver speeches about her value. She simply withdrew. And in that withdrawal, something shifted. The air around her changed. What once felt familiar became foreign. What once felt certain became unreachable. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon better than most. He knew that the parts of ourselves we disown, the anger, the boundaries, the refusal to collapse into pleasing, don't disappear. They descend into the shadow, that dark reservoir of the psyche where all our unlived lives gather. And when a woman stops explaining herself, she's not abandoning communication. She's reclaiming her shadow. She's integrating the part of herself that was taught to apologize for existing, the part that learned to shrink so others could expand. This is not cruelty. This is individuation. The man didn't notice it at first. How could he? He was accustomed to her presence the way one becomes accustomed to oxygen. Invisible, essential, always there. She listened when he spoke. She adjusted when he pulled away. She explained her feelings in careful, measured tones, as if her emotions were evidence in a trial where she was both defendant and prosecutor. And he half listened, nodded, continued scrolling, continued existing in the assumption that her devotion was a constant, unchanging law of nature. But constants, Jung would remind us, are illusions. Everything in the psyche moves. Everything seeks balance. She had been performing what psychologists call anxious attachment, a pattern born not from weakness, but from early wounding. Somewhere in her history, love became conditional. Somewhere, she learned that her worth was negotiable, that if she could just explain herself clearly enough, be patient enough, soft enough, understanding enough, she would finally be seen. The nervous system remembers these lessons. It encodes them into the body. And so she stayed. She explained. She tried to make him understand what he had no interest in understanding. Until one day she didn't. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no ultimatum, no final confrontation. She simply stopped feeding the machine. She stopped texting first. Stopped filling silences with reassurances. Stopped explaining why she felt hurt, why his dismissiveness stung, why his emotional unavailability made her feel like she was reaching for someone through glass. Not because she stopped caring, caring doesn't evaporate like water under sun, but because she finally understood something ancient and true. Some people don't want to understand you. They want you to remain a mystery they never have to solve. In Jungian terms, she stopped being his emotional container. She stopped absorbing his projections, the unprocessed aspects of his own psyche that he unconsciously cast onto her. When he felt suffocated, he projected neediness onto her. When he felt uncertain about his own worthiness, he projected instability onto her. And she, in her attempt to explain herself, had been trying to disprove projections that had nothing to do with her in the first place. You cannot reason with someone else's shadow. You can only withdraw your light from it. And so she did. She became still. Not cold. Stillness and coldness are not the same. Coldness is a defense. Stillness is sovereignty. She moved through her days with a new kind of presence, one that didn't bend toward him, didn't orbit him, didn't wait for his validation to determine her trajectory. She posted nothing cryptic on social media. She sent no signals. She simply lived her life as if the question of his attention had become irrelevant. This is where the alchemy happens. The Stoics understood this too, though they approached it from a different angle. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. When she stopped judging his behavior as evidence of her inadequacy and instead saw it as evidence of his unavailability, the pain transformed. It didn't vanish. Pain that real doesn't simply evaporate, but it lost its power to define her. She could hold it without being consumed by it. She could feel disappointed without making disappointment her identity. This is emotional maturity in its truest form, the capacity to feel without fracturing. He noticed, of course. How could he not? The absence of her attention created a vacuum, and nature, psychological nature especially, abhors a vacuum. Suddenly, the woman who had been so available, so willing to explain, so eager to bridge the distance between them, had become unreachable. Not because she blocked him or made declarations, but because she stopped trying. And trying, he realized too late, had been the foundation of their entire dynamic. This is the paradox of desire that governs so much of human attraction. We are drawn to what eludes us. Not because we're shallow or manipulative by nature, but because the psyche interprets absence as value. When someone is always available, always explaining, always pursuing, the unconscious mind categorizes them as secured. And secured things, in the economy of attention, lose their urgency. But when she withdrew, when she stopped performing her worth for him, something in his psyche stirred. Jung called this the anima, the unconscious feminine aspect within the male psyche. When projected onto a woman, the anima can make her seem either angelic or demonic, Madonna or whore, depending on the man's level of consciousness. But when a woman refuses to carry those projections anymore, when she stops being a screen for his unconscious fantasies, the man is forced to confront the raw reality of her as a separate being. And sometimes, that reality is terrifying, because it means she can leave. She has left in all the ways that matter. Here's where the story fractures, where the path splits into two possible futures. In one version, he begins to reach out. Texts arrive with new urgency. How have you been? I've been thinking about us. Can we talk? The language is different now, slightly vulnerable, tinged with something that resembles regret. But she's no longer the woman who would have dissected those messages for hidden meaning, who would have responded instantly with hope and explanation. She's learned the difference between genuine transformation and strategic nostalgia. She knows that people often miss the version of you that served them, not the version of you that actually exists. And she's no longer interested in contorting herself back into a shape that fits someone else's limitations. In the other version, he doesn't reach out at all. Perhaps he tells himself stories about why it ended, paints her as unstable, dramatic, impossible to please. This too is projection, the ego's refusal to examine its own shadow. And this too no longer touches her the way it once would have. Because she's done something radical, she stopped needing him to see her accurately in order for her to see herself clearly. This is the heart of Jungian individuation, becoming whole not through another person's validation, but through integrating all the parts of yourself you've disowned. The part that sets boundaries. The part that walks away. The part that refuses to explain, to justify, to perform. Trauma psychology teaches us that we repeat patterns until we resolve them. The child who wasn't heard becomes the adult who over-explains. The child who wasn't chosen becomes the adult who chases unavailable love. These aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies that outlived their usefulness. And breaking them requires not just insight, but action. When she stopped explaining herself, she broke the pattern. She didn't do it to manipulate him into chasing her. That would still be a strategy oriented around his response. She did it because she finally understood that her worth wasn't up for debate. That her feelings didn't require his agreement to be valid. That she could release someone and still love them, could walk away and still be tender. This is the paradox of true power. It looks like surrender, but it's actually liberation. The months pass. She moves differently now. There's a groundedness to her that wasn't there before, a kind of settled quality that comes from no longer fragmenting yourself across multiple versions to please different people. She's singular now. Integrated. The anxious attachment patterns haven't vanished entirely, healing isn't linear, and the nervous system takes time to rewire, but she catches them earlier now. Notices when she's about to explain something that doesn't require explanation. Feels the old impulse to pursue what's withdrawing and makes a different choice. She's dated other people, some briefly, some with more substance. But she's different in these new connections. She doesn't abandon her needs to accommodate theirs. doesn't perform understanding when she actually feels confused, doesn't explain away red flags as quirks. The first time someone shows her inconsistency, she doesn't launch into analysis or self-blame. She simply notices, pulls back, observes whether the pattern corrects or continues. This is discernment, the ability to see people as they are rather than as you need them to be. And discernment, more than passion or chemistry or shared interests, is what creates sustainable love. Jung wrote that we don't solve psychological problems, we outgrow them. The woman who used to chase, who used to explain, who used to fragment herself trying to be understood by someone who had no intention of understanding, didn't fix herself. She evolved past the need for that particular kind of validation. She learned something that can only be learned through experience, that your energy is the most precious resource you have. That where you place your attention determines the quality of your life. That some people will never see you clearly not because you're unclear, but because clarity would require them to change, and they're not ready for that work. And crucially, she learned this. You can love someone and still release them. You can grieve the loss and still know it was necessary. You can honor what was and still choose what is. This is the final turning point, the place where empowerment and detachment merge into wisdom. Because detachment, properly understood, isn't cold. It's not indifference or cruelty or revenge. Detachment is the ability to hold your own center while others spin in chaos. To feel deeply without losing yourself in the feeling. To love without making the other person responsible for your wholeness. The Buddha spoke of this as non-attachment. The Stoics called it apatheia, not apathy, but appropriate feeling, emotional response without being overwhelmed. Jung described it as the integration of opposites, the ability to hold both care and boundary, both openness and protection, both vulnerability and strength. This is what she embodies now. Not the woman who ran from feeling, but the woman who learned to feel selectively. Who learned that not every person deserves access to her depths. That intimacy is earned, not given away like promotional flyers to anyone who shows passing interest. And him? Perhaps he changed. Perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he's somewhere right now, telling himself stories about the woman who got away, the one who stopped explaining herself and became, in her absence, more real to him than she ever was in her presence. Or perhaps he's moved on completely, already unconsciously seeking the next person to carry his projections, the next woman who will patiently explain herself while he half listens and assumes she'll always be there. Either way, it no longer defines her. She's not waiting for his awakening to validate her journey. She's not holding her breath for an apology that may never come or would, if it came, arrive too late to matter in the way it once might have. She's free. Not because she stopped caring, but because she started caring more about herself than about being understood by someone who had chosen not to understand. There's a scene that plays out sometimes in her imagination, not obsessively, but occasionally, the way memory revisits moments of transformation. In it, they run into each other somewhere mundane. A coffee shop. A bookstore. The produce section of a grocery store. Their eyes meet. There's recognition, a flicker of the history they shared. And in this imagined encounter, she doesn't explain, doesn't perform, doesn't offer an opening for reconnection or closure or any of those tidy narratives we tell ourselves about endings. She simply smiles, a smile that holds everything and reveals nothing, and continues on her way. Because she's learned the most powerful lesson a woman can learn. Silence is not weakness when it comes from sovereignty. Withdrawal is not rejection when it comes from self-respect. Walking away is not failure when it comes from finally knowing your worth. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak, she simply sees more. She sees that some battles aren't worth fighting because they require you to diminish yourself to participate. She sees that explanation is only valuable between people who are genuinely trying to understand, not between someone seeking understanding and someone seeking dominance. She sees that love, real love, doesn't require you to justify your existence or prove your worthiness or explain your humanity. And most importantly, she sees herself. Not through the distorted mirror of someone else's limitations, not through the lens of anxious attachment or childhood wounding or any of the patterns that once drove her to chase what ran from her. She sees herself clearly, completely, without apology or performance. This is the ultimate feminine power, not seduction or manipulation, not games or strategies, but the simple, devastating truth of a woman who has integrated her shadow, who has individuated past the need for external validation, who has learned that the only person who needs to understand her is herself. She became untouchable not by building walls, but by dropping the burden of making others see what they were unwilling to witness. She became magnetic not by trying harder, but by stopping trying altogether. She became free not by finding someone who chose her, but by choosing herself so completely that anyone else's choice became secondary to her own. And in that freedom, in that silence, in that sovereign stillness, she found something more valuable than being understood by him or anyone else. She found herself. Unbroken. Untouchable.